Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. And also, the Search for the Ancient Bauble Kickstarter has launched, so make sure you go check that out. The Kickstarter campaign will last for 30 days, and after that, the playmat will no longer be available for purchase. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Core Studio. Welcome to the show. So, on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about some commanders that have some really unique decks. Or maybe I should say, commanders that you can take in really unique directions. Some commanders can be pretty straightforward on what direction that you might take them. But if you dig a little deeper into them, you can find that there are some pretty crazy things that you can actually do with them. Now, there isn't a right or wrong answer when it comes to what direction you want to take a commander. But let's just say that sometimes the most obvious answer isn't always the most interesting one. And actually, when it comes to commanders like these, you can even have an advantage over your opponents when they think you're going to be taking it in one direction and you take it in a completely different one. So with all that said, let's jump into it. So first off, I want to start with an example that might help illustrate what kinds of commanders I'm talking about. And some of you might be familiar with my somewhat recent episode on Nightlia Keen-Eyed, which is one of my new personal decks. Nightlia is a 5/6 god with Indestructible, and as long as your devotion to green is less than 5, she's not a creature. She has creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and by paying 2 and a green, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it in your hand, otherwise you may put it in your graveyard. Now, to be completely honest, when this Nightlia was originally spoiled, I pretty much wrote her off as, just another good stuff creature deck. And that's the way that she's probably perceived by a lot of players. If you sit down to play a game of Commander and someone pulls this out as their commander, your expectation is probably big green creatures or whatnot. What you might not be expecting, though, is mono green artifact aggro storm. Because, yeah, that's a thing. What many players see as a nice small benefit of creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, we see as an opportunity to break some things. So in this deck, we're going to be running cards like Mere Moon Vessel, Universal Automaton, and Endless One. Because again, with Nightlia in play, we can cast each of these for free. Now, there are certain creatures like Mere Moon Vessel that do have some utility, and there are other ones that definitely don't, like Universal Automaton. Regardless, the important thing is that they each cost 1, because again, with Nightlia in play, they are free to cast. And of course, even colorless creatures can help out as well, like an X-Mana Eldrazi like Endless One. We could cast it for free regardless, but now we can cast it for free and it lives. So we can flood the board in absolutely no time and get a ton of value out of things like Tangleroot and Beast Whisperer. Tangleroot says whenever a player casts a creature spell, that player adds green to their mana pool. So we can essentially generate mana by casting spells now. And then Beast Whisperer says whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. So with this and other draw engines, we can dig through our deck in absolutely no time, casting free creature after free creature. And then we've got a lot of ways to win from there, including one like Psychosis Crawler, where we just drain our opponents out when we're drawing cards. Regardless, again, this is an unexpected direction that your opponents probably won't see coming because it's such a unique build. Also, after putting together this deck, the creators of Altar Slaves were kind enough to send me over some Mythic frames to make it even more unique. So a huge thank you to them, and if you haven't done so yet, make sure you check out their Kickstarter on Mythic frames. Mythic frames are stunning frame art printed on removable inner sleeves that give your entire deck a uniform enhancement. The Kickstarter is already funded, but you can help unlock some fantastic additional designs. But now let's move on to another mono green commander that you can take in a unique direction with Gargos Vicious Watcher. It's an 8/7 Hydra with Vigilance for 3 green. It says Hydra spells you cast cost 4 less to cast, and whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell, Gargos Vicious Watcher fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So on its face, in the direction that many players take this commander, is Hydra Tribal. Like Nightlia, Gargos gives you cost reduction, but this one is more specific, but it's a lot more cost reduction. Yeah, saving 4 mana on a creature spell is huge. So of course you can get a lot of Hydras out quicker and a lot of Hydras bigger, and yes, a Hydra Tribal deck can be very effective with this. So because of this, the commander's trigger can take a back seat. Now, I'm not saying that that target fighting part is ignored, but I am saying that it's not the focus of the deck. So actually, if you decide to ignore that Hydra Tribal part, you can have a really unique build for Gargos. And actually a really powerful one as well. Gargos is an 8/7 with Vigilance for just 6 mana. And essentially whenever you target it with any spell, you can have it fight up to 1 creature. So Gargos can pretty much take out any creature on the board whenever you need it to. You can essentially build a low to the ground spells deck where you target Gargos over and over again and you control the board. So a cantripping spell like Charge Through can come in really handy. It says target creature gains trample until end of turn and draw a card. So for just 1 mana, you give Gargos trample, you draw a card, and you take out a creature. Auras can be very impactful in this deck as well, like Frog Tongue. It's an aura for just a green that's going to draw you a card, and it's going to give Gargos reach. And then a card like Season of Growth can be especially impactful in this deck. It says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1, but the important part here is whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, draw a card. So now every single spell that we cast that targets Gargos is basically going to cantrip. And we can also protect Gargos when it's fighting with things like Withstand Death and Magebane Armor. Withstand Death's going to make Gargos indestructible for the turn, so fight however much you want Gargos in that turn and take whatever you want out. And then Magebane Armor says prevent all non-combat damage that we dealt to equipped creature. So when Gargos fights, it can still dish out damage, but our opponent's creatures can't do any damage to it. And we can even include a fight benefit card like Foe Razor Regent. It says whenever a creature you control fights, put 2/+/+1 counters on it at the beginning of the next end step. So with this, we can keep growing Gargos and making it more and more deadly. Regardless, again, when your opponents see that you're playing Gargos, they're going to think that you're going to be playing Hydra Tribal, and then instead you're going to hit them with something completely different. So have fun fighting with Gargos to your heart's content. Next up, let's talk about Laplani Nest Tender. Laplani is a 2/3 human shaman that has pay 2 and tap, create a 0/1 green egg creature token with Defender. And whenever an egg you control dies, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card, put that card on the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, Laplani is a very popular commander, and it's typically built in a big creature tribal or dinosaur tribal or something along those lines. But you can do some incredibly unique things with her. Again, she can make you eggs, and when those eggs die, she guarantees that you're getting a creature off the top of your library. So you can definitely build something completely unexpected and out of left field. For example, let's talk about a type of deck that's going to utilize some ++1 counters and a card like Mere Entity. Now, what in the world is going on here? Well, let me explain. Vastwood Fortification is a simple MDFC that says put a ++1 counter on target creature. So if you need to use it as a land, you can, or you can get a ++1 counter on your commander. Speaking of which, we also have lands that can help us get counters on her as well, like Guildmage's Forum. It has pay 1 and tap it, add 1 mana of any color. If this mana is spent on a multicolor creature spell, that creature enters the battlefield with an initial ++1 counter on it. Now, why is it important to get a counter on her? Well, let's move on to Mere Entity. Mere Entity is a 1/1 changeling that has pay X until end of turn. Creatures you control have base power toughness XX and gain all creature types. So, what you want to do is to get set up with a couple of eggs in play, as well as at least 1 ++1 counter on Laplani. If you don't already have Mere Entity out, that's completely fine. You're just going to need some ways to sacrifice your eggs, of which there are plenty of ways in these colors. Regardless, in the 99, including Mere Entity, you're only going to be running 4 total creatures. So just for simplicity's sake, let's say that you've got 2 eggs in play, you sacrifice one of them, and you hit Mere Entity off the top of your library. Then you are going to activate Mere Entity's ability for 0 as many times as you want. Let's just say 1 trillion. So on the stack, we've got 1 trillion activations of until end of turn, creatures you control have base power and toughness 0/0 and gain all creature types. So because of that, Mere Entity and our other egg are going to die. Thanks to the activation, they're both all creature types, including eggs, so they are going to trigger Laplani. Now, Laplani is going to survive this activation because although she has base power and toughness 0/0, with that ++1 counter on her, she's a 1/1. So with Mere Entity and then our egg dying, we're going to be hitting more creatures off the top. And the only other 3 creatures in this deck are going to be Purity, Serra Avatar, and Purphoros, God of the Forge. It really doesn't matter which one we hit first, so let's just say that we hit them in this order. Both Purity and Serra Avatar say when they're put into a graveyard from anywhere, shuffle into its owner's library. So with 1 trillion activations on the stack of turning them into eggs and making them 0/0s, they are going to infinitely die and loop in our deck. Which is great because the other creature that we're going to be getting thanks to our extra egg is Purphoros, God of the Forge. It has as long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Purphoros isn't a creature. And that is key because we definitely don't want to sacrifice this one. because he has whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Perforos deals 2 damage to each opponent. So when things get going, this is what's going to be happening. Purity comes in play and Perforos pings each of our opponents for 2. One of your entity's trillion triggers happens, and Purity becomes a 0/0 with all creature types, including eggs, so it dies and then Laplani triggers. And because Purity is put into a graveyard, it shuffles back into our library. With that Laplani trigger, we get the only other creature in our deck, which is Sarah Avatar. Perforos pings for 2, Sarah Avatar becomes a 0/0 egg, it dies, and then it happens again. And again, and again, and again. Until Perforos pings all of our opponents to death. So yeah, there are some pretty crazy things that you can do with Laplani, and it doesn't just have to be a big creature deck, though that is also a fun build as well. Next up, let's move on to Dalco's Crafter of Wonders. Dalcos is a 2/4 Merfolk Artificer that has tap, add colorless, spend this mana only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. He also has equipped creatures you control have flying and haste. Now, Dalcos is already not your typical Izzet commander. A lot of Izzet decks are spell-slinging type decks where you want to cast a bunch of low-to-the-ground instants and sorceries. But Dalcos benefits you for leaning heavily into equipment. But a unique direction that you can take Dalcos is to lean heavily into mana generation. Giving your creatures flying is great, but being able to give them haste just for being equipped is fantastic. So now you can utilize mana dorks right away, just like Dalcos, simply by equipping them. And Izzet mana dorks probably isn't your typical Izzet deck that your opponents are going to be expecting. So of course, low-to-the-ground equipment that costs nothing to equip like Shuko can be fantastic in this deck. It has an equip cost of 0, so it's kind of like a Lightning Greaves in its ability to just give haste. So then when you play a Mandork like Palladium Mirror, you can just attach it to it and tap it for mana right away. So essentially your Palladium Mirror only costs 1 to cast because you got 2 of that mana back right away. So you can cast more mana dorks, which you give haste, then you tap them for mana, and then you see where this is going. And a really impactful mana dork for this kind of a deck can be Elena Kessig Trapper. She has tap and amount of red equal to the greatest power among creatures you control that enter the battlefield this turn. So you give her haste, you tap her for a ton, and you have fun from there. And of course, since you're in blue, you've got access to plenty of clones like Mirror Image. So you can make copies of your most effective non-legendary mana dorks, and you can make even more mana. And of course, you can utilize spells like Dramatic Reversal to untap all your non-land permanents and then tap them again for mana. And of course, you can take advantage of fantastic board wipes like Whelming Wave. It's going to return all creatures to their owner's hands except for Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents, so pretty much all creatures. So you tap all your Mandorks for a ton of mana, then you cast this, you bounce everyone's creatures back to their hands, and then you cast your creatures again, you give them haste, and you make even more mana. So yeah, Dalcos allows you to take an Izzet deck in a lot of interesting directions. I mean, who knew Izzet mana dorks could actually be a thing? But next up, let's talk about the 5-color commander of the walking, talking book itself, Cody Vociferous Codex. It's a 1/4 construct that says you can't cast permanent spells because that's the thing. Also, by paying 4 and tapping it, you add Wooburg. Whenever you cast your next spell this turn, exile cards to the top of your library to exile an instant or sorcery card with lesser mana value. Until end of turn, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put each other card exiled this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. So yeah, when you first read Cody, you probably are going to do a double take and say, what? Okay, it does what? Now, the first thought for this commander might be, okay, you can't cast permanent spells, so I'm going to build a Spell Slinger deck where I pretty much just have non-permanent spells. And that can definitely be a fantastic direction to take it, but there's also some unique directions that can be pretty off the wall and come out of nowhere. Now, the first of those other directions that I'm going to bring up is a direction that I talked about when I actually did the quick take on this commander. And I actually called that quick take the weirdest 5-color commander, which is probably accurate. Not only is it a walking, talking book, but also its effects and actual card is pretty weird. Regardless, with that direction, you can essentially donate Cody, because who doesn't want a creature in play that says you can't cast permanent spells? So essentially, it's a 5-color Zedru type deck. Zedru is the donate commander that everyone knows and loves, but unfortunately, it's only 3 colors. So Cody not only gives you access to 5 colors, but it's also a fantastic thing to give to a creature-based deck. So once you get Zedru in play, you just have to pay red, white, and blue, and then target opponent takes Cody away from you. And again, because you've got access to now green and black, you've got access to a lot of fantastic things to give away to your opponents, like Nefarious Lich. It's an enchantment that says a lot of things, but it also says when it leaves play, you lose the game. So you give it to some unlucky player, and then you get rid of it, and they lose. Or, you know, with Cody in play, you can just cast Fracture Identity, targeting it. It says exile target non-land permanent. Each player other than its controller creates a token that's a copy of it. So congratulate your opponents, because now they're each a proud owner of Cody. Now this is definitely one off-the-wall direction that you can take a Cody deck, but again, as I mentioned, there's another one I want to bring up. And that would be the actual deck tech that I built around Cody, which was a cycling living end deck, and thank you again, Alec, for that suggestion. So again, although Cody doesn't let you cast permanent spells, you can still, get a bunch of permanents and play with it. Essentially, you're going to cycle a ton of creatures, including the very lovely 11/11 Titanoth Rex. So you cycle the creatures, you get them in your graveyard, you draw a card, you cycle more creatures, and you keep going. Eventually, when you're ready, you activate Cody, and then you cast a 1-mana spell like, say, Quicken. And then in your deck, you're only going to have one spell which costs 0, so you're going to hit that every single time, and that spell is Living End, which says each player exiles all creature cards from their graveyard, then sacrifices all creatures they control, then puts all cards they exile this way onto the battlefield. Basically, you swap everything in the graveyards with everything that's in play. So your opponents either have no creatures or very few creatures, and you've got a ton of creatures in play which you cycled into your graveyard. So have fun from there. Again, Cody is a very interesting commander because it looks like it has a giant downside, but you can kind of turn that downside into an upside. Or you can just find a way to essentially get around that thanks to its other ability. Regardless, while your opponents might be expecting a value-generating Spellslinger deck, you're coming at them with something completely different. Next up, let's talk about Kataki War's Wage. Now, Kataki essentially sees no play. And at face value, it looks like it might be a Hate Bear commander, so that's probably why. A Hate Bear commander in mono white? Yeah, not many people are interested in that. But let me tell you that Kataki can actually be a value-generating engine for you in the right deck, on top of being a Hate Bear for your opponents. Anyways, it says, all artifacts have at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this artifact unless you pay 1. So this can absolutely hose your opponents, because now you've got to pay for all your artifacts, including your mana rocks. So if they've got a mana rock that just taps for 1, it's basically useless. Now, although it might seem like a downside that you've got to pay for your own artifacts, you can actually turn that into an upside by, not paying for them and having to sacrifice them. Because there are artifacts like Ichor Wellspring, Solemn Simulacrum, and Mere Retriever that actually want to be sacrificed. Ichor Wellspring says when it enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So with Kataki in play, this essentially becomes pay 2 mana, draw 2 cards. And who said mono white decks couldn't draw? Okay, oh wait, I did. I've said that plenty of times before. Anyways, moving on. Solemn Simulacrum has when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle, and when it dies, you draw a card. So again, this is ramp and guaranteed card draw thanks to Kataki. And of course, Mere Retriever is a fantastic card as well. When it dies, return another target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. So you can bring something else back and get it back into play and sacrifice it again for value. Or how about Summoner's Egg, which when it comes into play, you may remove a card in your hand from the game face down. And then when it's put into a graveyard from play, turn the imprinted face down card face up. If that card is a creature card, put into play into your control. This is basically, hey, pay 4 mana and cheat out whatever creature you want. So if you maybe have an Eldrazi or whatnot, have fun with that. And then how about a 5 mana extra turn spell with Ugin's Nexus? It says if a player begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. If Ugin's Nexus will be put into a graveyard from the battlefield, instead exile and take an extra turn after this one. So yeah, we definitely want to sacrifice this. And we can also utilize another legendary creature like Teshar, which can help us get a lot of value throughout the game. It says whenever you cast a historic spell, return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. We're going to be casting a lot of artifacts and sacrificing a bunch of artifact creatures, so yeah, we can basically get a lot of things going with this. So again, on its face, Kataki might look like it has absolutely no potential for being a commander. Again, not too many players are looking for a mono-white Hate Bear commander, but by turning its downside into an upside, you can get a lot of value out of a commander like this. Next up, let's talk about Exodura Reality Sculptor pretty quickly. So this one is on my list, but for a different reason. Basically, I've got an idea for a different direction for an Exodura deck, but we need some more of a certain type of card. Like Kataki, Exodura doesn't really see all that much play, and in the decks it does see play in, it's a Morph Tribal Commander. The direction that I would want to take it if we get more Manifest support is a deck where we try to cheat out big things, and then we just flip them up for cheap. So we could manifest with cards like Scroll Fate and Primordial Mist. Scroll Fate has tap manifest a card from your hand, so yeah, if we've got something big in our hand, we just put it right into play. And then Primordial Mist says at the beginning of your end step, you may manifest the top card of your library. So again, we get something off the top and we put it into play. And with Mono Blue, we've got plenty of ways to play with the top card of our library, so yeah, we can basically determine what that card is going to be. And if that's a card like Omniscience, that's a lot of fun to manifest and then flip over with Exodura. It might just look like a simple 2-2 or I guess a 3-3 thanks to Exodura's Anthem, but it's definitely not. You cheat out big things with Manifest, and then you flip them over with Exodura or a Blink effect or whatnot, and you have some fun. Again, this is my idea for a potential future deck. Hopefully we get some more Manifest cards in the future so this can actually be a thing. Regardless, again, at this point, Exodura is seen by many as a lesser Morph Commander because there are other better Morph Commanders out there. But if you take Exodura in a different direction that isn't Morph, you can get a lot more value out of it, whereas the other ones can't. Next up, I want to bring up a commander that I talked about quite a long time ago with Kamal, Fist of Krosa. Kamal is a 4-3 human druid that has pay a green, target land becomes a 1-1 creature until end of turn, it's still a land. And by paying 2 green, creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain trample until end of turn. So Kamal essentially has a repeatable overrun type effect. And many players build around that by building a lot of creatures and a lot of mana generation into the deck, and then they just pump their creatures and swing and win. But the direction that I took the deck was, let's just say, slightly different. Because the direction that I took it was mono green mass land destruction. Which, if you're going to be playing this deck, make sure that your group is okay with mass land destruction ahead of time. Anyways, it's going to utilize an absurd amount of mana generators, including a lot of mana dorks like Llanowar Elves, Whisper of the Wilds, and Karametra's Acolyte. Llanowar Elves taps for a green, Whisper of the Wilds is going to tap for a green, and Karametra's Acolyte is going to tap for an absurd amount of green. Of course, you've got ways to untap these and tap again. Regardless, you just want to make an absurd amount of green mana. Then you dump that mana into Kamal's ability to turn your opponent's lands into 1-1 creatures. And then you utilize things like Powder Keg, Time Bomb, and Cyclone. Powder Keg has tap, sacrifice Powder Keg, destroy each artifact and creature with converted mana cost equal to the number of fuse counters on Powder Keg. So your opponent's lands are now creatures with a mana cost of 0. So all of them go bye-bye. And then Time Bomb says during your upkeep put a time counter on Time Bomb. By paying 1, you tap and sacrifice it and deal 1 damage to each creature and each player equal to the number of time counters on Time Bomb. So again, all you need is 1 counter on this and all your opponent's land creatures are gone. And then Cyclone is very similar, basically you pay to get win counters on it and then it pings everything. So yeah, who knew that mono green land destruction could be a thing? Apparently Kamal did. Kamal just does not like lands apparently. Next up, let's talk about yet another mono-green commander with Marwyn the Nurturer. And actually looking back on it, there's quite a few mono-green commanders in this list, which probably means that you've got access to a lot of good things in green, and that's a different discussion for a different day. But anyways, let's keep going on. Marwyn is a 1-1 elf druid that says whenever another elf enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on Marwyn the Nurturer. And you can tap her to add an amount of green equal to Marwyn's power. Now, many players might see this as, hey, this is definitely an elf tribal commander because you just play more elves, you get more counters on her, and she's a fantastic mana dork for you. But I did a very low budget build on her and I took her in a very different direction. And that direction didn't focus on elves, but it focused on getting her an absurd amount of power and having her tap for an absurd amount of mana in 1 turn. So it utilized things like Blanchwood Armor to pump her power permanently. It gives her +1/+1 for each force you control so her power grows throughout the game. And then a card like Gigantomancer is fantastic in this kind of a deck. By paying 1, target creature control becomes a 7/7 until end of turn. So her base power and toughness becomes 7/7, effectively giving her a +6/+6 in that turn for just 1 mana. And then Ursipine is especially fantastic. It has pay a green, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So we get her power up, we tap her for a ton of mana, we dump all that mana into Ursipine's ability to get her even more powerful. And then we untap her with something like Seeker of Skybreak so she can tap for even more mana. Or we can untap her with a card which is fantastic in this deck, which essentially sees no play elsewhere with Malachite Talisman. It says whenever a player casts a green spell, you may pay 3 if you do untap target permanent. Again, with this deck, we're going to be casting an absurd number of green spells, and yeah, paying 3 mana to untap Marwyn to tap for a lot more than 3 is going to be well worth it. So then we can generate an absurd amount of mana and cast something like, oh, I don't know, Hurricane? It's going to deal X damage to each creature with flying and each player. And of course, we've got other ways to gain life in this deck, or ways to essentially make sure that we have the most life in this deck, and basically we just win from there. So yeah, kind of like an Exsanguinate or a mass damage red spell finisher, you're typically not going to see in a mono green deck. Again, especially with a mono green commander, which many players are expecting you to go elf tribal with. Now, the last commander with a unique direction I want to bring up is Morphon the Boundless, which I actually did a recent episode on. So if you want to see the episode on that and see how exactly that deck works, I won't spoil the entire idea of it right here. I'll just kind of give you the high-level version of it though. Now, Morphon is kind of known by any as the go-to or ultimate tribal commander for essentially any tribe. It's a 6/6 shapeshifter with changeling that costs 7, and when it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Spells of the chosen type cost Wooburg less to cast. This effect reduces only the amount of colored mana you pay. And other creatures you control the chosen type get +1/+1. So again, Morphon is essentially the catch-all for a tribal commander. If you really like a tribe and it doesn't have a great tribal commander, or one that isn't all 5 colors and you want access to all the colors, here you go, choose Morphon. When it comes into play, you choose that tribe that you're playing, and then it reduces the cost of your tribe spells, and it also pumps them too. Now, Morphon is an incredibly popular commander. In fact, I think at this point, it's number 21 on EDH Rack. And in pretty much every single one of those decks, Morphon is the head of a tribal deck. So whether that's Eldrazi, or gods, or slivers, or dragons, or werewolves, or whatever you want to pick, there's a Morphon deck for it. But for my new Mad Lad deck, I took it in a very different direction. Because instead of making a tribal deck with it, well, let's just say I made a tribal-less deck with it. There are a lot of creatures in the deck, and pretty much none of them match up on a specific tribe. Now, why in the world would I do that? Well, I'll just give you a hint by showing you some of the creatures in it. In that deck, I'm looking to utilize some creatures like Cavern Harpy, Lava Zombie, and Sparkcaster. Cavern Harpy is a Harpy beast, Lava Zombie is a zombie, and Sparkcaster is a Kavu, so yeah, those don't match up. But each of them have very similar text. When they come into play, you return a certain creature back to its owner's hand. So, finding these creatures was the impetus of this deck, and if you want to see exactly how this deck works, make sure you check that episode out. Regardless, with all that, this episode is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So, in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are. What are some commanders out there that have some really unique builds? What commanders can you think of that many players see as going in one direction, and yet you can take it in a completely different one that's pretty off the wall? I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and seeing what unique ideas you come up with. And of course, as always, thanks again and have a good one.